In today's video, we're going to be analyzing all the deals we saw in and around the NHL Trade Deadline and declare which teams we felt were the winners and losers of Trade Deadline 2020. We'll jump into that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. I hope you were able to keep up with all the breaking news we saw out of the NHL and all the trades on deadline day, February the 24th. It was a very extremely busy day, record-setting day for deals. Considering how many deals we saw coming in ahead of the deadline, I was very surprised how many we saw on actual deadline day. Although there wasn't too many big blockbusters, there was a lot of smaller deals for the most part, at least on average. But it was still a very busy day. All kinds of players swapping teams, and certainly lots to keep up with. If you weren't able to keep up with everything, I did create a playlist. We were putting out videos throughout today talking about all the bigger trades. Some deals were kind of lumped into multiple videos. So I do have a playlist titled NHL Trade Deadline 2020. I'll put that up here in the YouTube cards, and I'll also link it in the pinned comment down below. So certainly check out all the deals if you haven't already had time to do so. Now let's jump in here and talk about who I think are some of the winners and losers of NHL Trade Deadline based on all the moves that they made. Now, in my opinion, one of the biggest winners, if not the biggest winner of the deadline area, was the Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricanes did a tremendous effort to replace some of their injured players and really did spend wisely, in my opinion. They had some major adds on the blue line with Sami Vatanen and Brady Shea. They also made a pretty significant deal with the Florida Panthers, picking up Vincent Trocheck, and I don't think the prices were too high on any of them. They already had an additional first-round pick that they acquired from the Maple Leafs, so they used that to acquire Brady Shea, so they still have their own first-round pick leading into this year's draft. Of course, Sami Vatanen was a rental. They didn't have to give up too much there, and even the trade for Trocheck, they didn't move up too much, between of their future at least. They did give up a couple of roster players, but nothing too significant, nothing too crazy. Looked like the Florida Panthers were looking to move some salary out and kind of shake things up on their end of things. So overall, I thought they did a tremendous job. I mean, there was a lot of question marks around goaltending, considering the health of Reimer and Mrazek are both in question leading into the home stretch, getting into the playoffs. But addressing goaltending was certainly going to be a tougher move to make while trying to address their blue line and elsewhere as well. So clearly they must have enough confidence they can get into the playoffs with what they have for goaltending. And of course, it doesn't really look like Mrazek may not be out too long. It's still kind of unclear where it was a concussion-like symptom. So those can be unpredictable at times. But overall, I really like what the Hurricanes did. Now, in my opinion, one of the other big winners of the day was the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers didn't spend too much, but they gave their team a nice boost of confidence. Ken Holland made some good additions on the blue line and on the wings to help address a few needs of the team and help with some injuries as well. Of course, a lot of what he brought in was players he was familiar with from his past. Of course, picked up a couple players in separate deals from the Red Wings, acquiring Mike Green on the blue line. Of course, Green's not really the prolific offensive guy he used to be. He's a veteran guy who's been through a lot, certainly has a lot of experience, can kind of keep things simple and still help offensively in a more simpler kind of way. He's not obviously dishing passes to Ovi like he was back in his heyday on the power play, but still he can be an effective guy back there. Of course, he picked up Andreas Athanasiou, the speedster as well, former 30-goal scorer with Detroit, so can certainly help on the wing and provide more speed. Hopefully he can find a way to mesh with either McDavid or Draisaitl on those top two units, because clearly that's something they were missing. And even Tyler Ennis was a kind of a sneaky selection here as one of the more under the radar deals we saw. Pick up for a 5th-round pick, pretty small price to pay. Ennis goes back to Edmonton, where he's originally from, so it's like a homecoming for him. He's having a solid year in Ottawa. He had a pretty nice year last year in Toronto, on working off back-to-back one-year deals after running through a tough patch with the Minnesota, previously to that, the Buffalo Sabres, where he started his career. So clearly, just some smaller pickups. Didn't give up too much. They kept all their top prospects. Didn't have to give up their first-round pick, but they made some nice additions. And I think overall, we can say the Oilers were certainly a deadline winner as well. I was really pleased to see the Vegas Golden Knights go out and grab Robin Lehner. Not something we expected. That was one of the more surprising deals of the day. Wasn't completely shocked to see Lehner moved, but I was shocked to see him go to Vegas. I mean, although I did mention in some videos before that I wouldn't be surprised to see them upgrade their backup goaltending, but they didn't have a lot of confidence in Subban heading into the playoffs. And unfortunately for Marc-Andre Fleury, as good of a goalie as he is, he does have a history of getting hurt. And if he were to get hurt, they could be in some serious trouble. I just didn't expect him to go out and get not only a really good backup, but a legitimate, top 10 starting goaltender as well. So now they have probably one of the best, if not the best tandem around the NHL. There's certainly a few other tandems that ever, can get into that argument as well, because this is a brand new goalie tandem. They haven't really had a chance to coexist here yet, so we'll see, but has a lot of potential. I think Vegas and Edmonton certainly going to be battling it out with the Canucks for the top spot in the Pacific, and they all made their moves. Of course, we saw Vancouver make their moves ahead of the deadline, picking up Tyler Toffoli, so they kind of all did different types of deals, but in their own way kind of kept up with each other here. Of course, the New York Islanders made some significant trades. Of course, they had acquired veteran defenseman Andy Green ahead of the deadline a few days prior, and then they picked up J.G. Pageau from the Ottawa Senators. Now, they did extend him to a new contract, and they did pay a hefty price to bring him in as well. So I like the addition. I'm going to call them winners, but depending on how that works out, they might regret kind of overpaying a bit here. As much as he's a great player, he's been one of my favorites as a Senators fan myself. I absolutely love Pageau and the hard work he brings, and he's a heart and soul kind of player. Good overall, real well-rounded guy, good on faceoffs, good on PK, had some big playoff moments. So he's certainly a great addition that way, but he's having a career year and a contract year, which is something we see a lot, and I just hope for his sake that he keeps up the production to justify the money they gave him, because they did pay him more money than the Senators were willing to pay. Overall, they saw him being a fit more as a third-line center once a lot of their other younger players who were more offensively skilled come up and pass him on the depth chart, and he wasn't going to be a first-line player anymore, so it's natural that his production would come down a bit, back down to earth a little bit. He could still play a big role. They wanted to keep him. He wanted to stay, but he knew he could get more money elsewhere, and at the end of the day, they weren't going to meet those demands, and it kind of makes sense for them. And when the Islanders pony up that kind of deal to offer a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and possibly a third, there's a conditional third in there as well, you have to take that deal if you're Pierre Dorion. As he said in his press conference, it was one of the more emotional days he had, one of his tougher calls to make as a GM to trade Pageau. He didn't really want to, but he couldn't pass up that offer. And it was becoming difficult that they were going to be able to sign him. So it only made sense. So I think the Senators did well, and we'll get to them here as well, because I think we can also call them winners. Not only the Islanders for making the selection, but this was a win-win. The Islanders get their boost for win now, and the Senators get their package of futures for win later. And they made lots of other deals, like I mentioned as well, to Oilers. They traded Tyler Ennis, they traded J.G. Pageau, they traded Nemestikov, and they had traded DeMello a few days ahead of time. And they got a bunch more picks to the plethora of picks that they already had. They now have 3 first-rounders in the 2020 draft, which is a very deep draft. They're going to have 2 of their picks are likely going to be, anywhere from top 5, top 6, or 7, depending on how the lottery balls fall. Right now, I think if it was based on standings alone, they'd be picking, I think, 4th and 5th, I believe, or is it 3rd and 4th, depending on the day here. But either way, even if the lottery balls don't go quite their way, still to have 2 picks that high is really tremendous. And then the Islanders pick, depending on how far they go, could be in the mid-20s, early 20s. It just depends on how their playoffs go. So we'll see about that. But either way, to have a third one, and all those other picks, they have so many second and third rounders as well. It's a lot of currency. They can either package those up to move up further into the first round, or maybe to acquire other players. They have so much assets in the way of picks that they can put those to good use, and the Senators do have a good history of drafting well. So I guess we'll see, but I think they did quite well to accomplish a lot more for their future at this deadline. So I'm definitely declaring the Senators as a deadline winner. Of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins, I thought, did really well as well. Of course, they picked up Jason Zucker, kind of kicked off the early deadline, if you will. Jim Rutherford was busy making that deal, which I thought was a great trade. Kind of sad to see them give up Kalen Addison, but like I said, when you have Crosby and Malkin both in their prime still and still producing the way they are, you have to go for it, and that's just a casualty of that effect. But clearly they gave up Galchenyuk, which was nice to move off the roster. Then they go in to get Patrick Marleau, a great veteran presence who might be able to win a Stanley Cup with Pittsburgh and achieve his dream, and while helping them get another one. So clearly I like the addition of Marleau, small price to pay to do that. They moved out Dominic Cahoon to Buffalo, and they bring back Connor Sheary, who they're very familiar with. Had a moderate amount of success before, and will fit in nicely and easily because of the familiarity. And they also brought in Evan Rodriguez, who can be a depth piece for them as well. So clearly, the Penguins did well. They didn't give up too much of the future outside of Kalen Addison, but they really added to their overall depth. I think we can call the New York Rangers deadline winners as well. They did not trade the biggest trade chip on the trade bait board leading into the deadline, who's been up there for months, and it's Chris Kreider. They sent a signal that they're kind of heading into win now mode, not win later. They feel like they've done well enough and built this thing up enough that they can win and compete now. So keeping Kreider is that much more important to keep him in line here with other guys like Zibanejad and Panarin. Ryan Strome needs a new contract, but he's been playing really well for them too. That's a big signal that they're ready to go now and not too much into the future. So that's kind of like, making a big acquisition is keeping one of their top guys guys. And of course, they traded Brady Shea for a first-round pick, so they do help themselves for later at the same time. But obviously, having all those contracts on the blue line, like I mentioned before, I thought Tony DeAngelo might be the player to go. But instead, they'll be able to have more money to afford to keep him and keep him longer term. Same with Adam Fox, who's going to be getting a good raise here in due time. And you've already got Jacob Trouba on a long-term expensive contract. So it was a matter of one of those likely being moved out. I thought they might move DeAngelo because they really played hardball with him at last year's offseason. Getting a new contract took forever to get done. But turns out, when you get a team offering you a first rounder for Brady Shea, you take that deal, you pay DeAngelo, and overall, I think you're a better team now and into the future, considering the more ice time you can give DeAngelo, who's proven to be a solid D-man, offensively gifted, and then you get another first-round pick that you can probably get a pretty good asset on for the future as well. So I really like what the Rangers did, even though they didn't do a lot. They did a lot of subtlety, but signing Kreider sent the message. And really, I think you can say like almost everybody in the Metro went for it. It's the mighty Metro division really is well positioned. That is definitely going to be more than likely the odds of a team coming out of the East from the Metro are that much greater, considering how strong a lot of the teams are. And lastly, I'm going to call the Devils deadline winners as well. I thought they shed a lot of their UFAs who were able to bring back some good assets for the future. They traded Captain Andy Green a few days early. They traded Wayne Simmons, Sami Vatanen. They did pretty well in that regard. Of course, they had previously moved Taylor Hall earlier, well ahead of the deadline. So clearly, New Jersey is positioning themselves here with Tom Fitzgerald at the helm now for more of a future rebuild. So I guess we'll see how all that works out. But at least they didn't sit on all these pending UFAs and ended up losing them in the summer for no returns. They didn't do as quite as well on some of the returns as maybe like a team like Ottawa, but they didn't have the trade chips to move where they've already done that with Taylor Hall previously. So either way, I thought they did well, and so far I like what GM Tom Fitzgerald is trying to accomplish there in New Jersey. Now, one team I'm not really going to call a winner or a loser, but I wanted to mention is kind of in the middle. I was a little bit disappointed, but not enough to call them a deadline loser, and that was the Colorado Avalanche. I really thought we were going to see a big deal come out of the Avs, and really a big part of that could have been the fact that Chris Kreider wasn't moved. They were a team that were heavily reported being in on Kreider for quite a bit of time, and maybe they were really banking on that, and some of these other forwards end up getting moved early on. Like we saw Toffoli and Zucker and other guys. Kreider was the guy they seemed to be zoned in on, and it didn't happen. He ended up staying in New York, and that could have really put a major wrinkle in their plans. They did do a couple little other depth moves, like they traded Rosen back to the Leafs for Hutchison. They had some goaltending depth, which is fine. They picked up Nemestikov from Ottawa, which is a good depth move, someone who can help, on the PK especially, play in the bottom six. So overall, they did a couple small deals. They didn't do anything crazy, give up much for the future. So I do like that. Joe Saki's pretty good that way. He doesn't usually do anything too wild and crazy in that regard with future assets. But I just really would have liked to have seen the Avs make more of a move to kind of go for it and then maybe add one more weapon in their forward group. But I think a lot of that just boiled down to the fact that it just wasn't there once Kreider re-signed. Now, deadline day losers. Now, there's certainly a few teams here that I think we can label as losers who obviously missed out on some big opportunities, I think. And we're going to start with the Nashville Predators, who, as I record this, are actually in a wild card spot. They're very lucky, in my opinion. They've seen other teams like Winnipeg continue to struggle. But the David Poile and the Preds didn't really do much of anything. And that team has been struggling all year in a variety of capacities. I really thought we'd see a little bit more of a Predator shakeup to try to get this team into the playoffs. I would think that based on all their prior success in the last number of years, that not making the playoffs would be a massive failure, especially looking at their depth at center between Duchesne, Johansson, and Turris. All that money tied up for with very little results. Look at Matt Duchesne. He's proven here that for some reason it seems to be, I don't know if it's a curse following him or what it is, but once he's on a team, he's got a contract in place. He just doesn't seem to perform well. Once he left Colorado, he was struggling there at the end of it. He went to Ottawa, took a long time to get acquainted. Really picked it up when he was needing a contract. Had a great year last year. Goes to Columbus, did okay, but not fantastic. Columbus did win a round. Goes to Nashville, and now he's not having a great year on a brand new deal, and the Preds are down too because they rely on him. And clearly, it's just, I'm not sure what it is about Matt Duchesne, but he just doesn't seem to have a lot of team success following him around. Kind of like Taylor Hall, they just seem to not be able to get over the hump when it comes to winning the most important and being more successful in the playoffs and stuff. But either way, I was disappointed we didn't see anything out of the Predators. I really thought David Poile would shake things up, maybe move a UFA or two, or do something to try to get this team re-energized to get in the playoffs, and we didn't see it. The Florida Panthers are another team I'm calling deadline day losers. They traded Vincent Trocheck, which really isn't a big deal, but there's some reports indicating that ownership had directed management to cut a bunch of money off the payroll, which is really odd signal considering how much they spent last year in the offseason. They paid big bucks to bring in a coach like Joel Quenneville. They paid mega bucks to Sergei Bobrovsky on a long-term deal to be the star goaltender, who's proven not to be that. He's been really inconsistent this year. And now they're cutting payroll after all that. I mean, they were also rumored to be in on Panarin and came close to getting him in the offseason as well. And even though they're a more competitive team and having a decent year, they're still struggling at the attendance level of things as well. So I'm not really sure what's going on with the Panthers. There's a lot of talk they might move a pending UFA like a Hoffman or Dodonov. Then Trocheck goes instead. Either way, it creates more payroll to keep one of those guys. But when you're in a playoff position and you're having a pretty good year and you're being directed to cut payroll less than a year after spending all that money, it just seems really weird. And Rich, really, we shouldn't be shocked because we've seen a lot of weirdness from the Panthers in that regard and over there how the team is run and managed here in the last number of years. So I'm not really sure what to think, but I am definitely calling them deadline day losers for 2020. I am also going to lump the Toronto Maple Leafs into that category as well. I mean, I know a lot of people were kind of on the fence what they wanted to see out of Kyle Dubas, and I didn't expect anything like major. Like, I know there's a lot of talk about Tyson Barrie, and I think they were open to the idea of moving him, but based on what the insiders are saying, like Bob McKenzie and Darren Dreger, Elliot Friedman, etc., there just really wasn't a good enough return to justify it. The Leafs were not going to be a better team at the end of the day. And it just didn't make sense to do the deal. I mean, clearly, Barrie likely does walk as a UFA in the summer. It's going to cost him a lot of money to keep him, and I'm not really sure it's been the best fit. So there was, openness there. But at the same time, they weren't going to really take a step back to be any worse for this year. I do think at some point, whether it be this year or next year, if they don't get that playoff success, there will be more significant changes to this team, whether it be one of their big 3 or 4 players maybe moved out to acquire other assets. Could Kyle Dubas maybe be on the hot seat? It's hard to say. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But if they don't get the playoff success this year, and they say they go one more year and they don't get it again, then after all that money being invested, I think at some point something's got to give on the player side of it, more so than just the coach or management. But I guess we'll see. I mainly expected Dubas to add more depth. The day after the deadline, Jake Buzzin breaks his hand, is out for a month. I realized they don't have a crystal ball and couldn't see that happening, but adding Calle Rosen in there was fine. But somebody with more experience, I really thought they'd have more depth on the blue line. And a lot of that, too, is the fact that they're so tight against the cap. They have players likely coming back before the end of the regular season, so they have to have space to activate them. And it just, they have so much money invested. They're so top-heavy that they just don't have that flexibility, which really limited what they could do without money going out to come in, and just really made it really difficult on Kyle Dubas. And he's kind of painted himself into that corner, in my opinion. So I don't really have much sympathy for them, but at the same time, I really thought they would find a way, like some of these other teams, to add more depth, to be a deeper team, to have a better shot at least getting past the first round. I know heading into this year, many people said that if the Leafs don't at least win one round of playoffs this year, it's going to be considered a failed season. And I do, to tend to agree with that. Like, they need to make progress. They've been a playoff team for a few years now, haven't gotten past the first round. That's going to only happen so many times before changes are made that they need to, try to get over the hump. So I'm lumping them into deadline day losers here as well. And I'm also lumping in the Arizona Coyotes. Now, John Chayka was relatively quiet on deadline day. His big move happened earlier with Taylor Hall, but it's not really panning out. Since that deal has happened, they've slipped in the standings by quite a few spots, currently sit outside the playoffs. I really thought we'd see a little bit more measures here from Chayka. Didn't expect him to trade Taylor Hall, but a lot of these other moves are just not working out. Like, the team just can't score. Phil Kessel's been, like a ghost on a lot of nights. Taylor Hall's not getting anywhere near the offense like we expect, or that he has with his other teams in the past. A lot of it could be maybe it's around the coaching systems. I don't know. Because they're a West Coast team, to be honest, I don't get to watch the Coyotes as much as maybe some of you that might be watching from the West Coast. So maybe you might have more insight on why you think they're not able to score more, because they do have some ability. For players on the roster, they're just not getting it done outside of Connor Garland. It's just not happening on a regular basis. So I don't know what this team needs to do, but after what they spent to get Taylor Hall, they could be at risk to lose him as a free agent, and now they could be at risk to miss the playoffs because they didn't do anything else to really make this team a little bit more better balanced and have a little bit more scoring throughout the lineup. So I am lumping the Coyotes into this mess as well. And lastly here, we're going to lump in the Calgary Flames, and I think they were very limited. They did add some blue line depth, but I would have liked to have seen the Flames maybe add another top 6, top 9 forward. Clearly, when they traded Frolik earlier in the season, I expected them to do more with that cap space, and they kind of sat on it, and they've had injuries in the blue line, which I know is complicated things, but they could have possibly even made a move earlier to address the some extra secondary scoring up front to make them better positioned for the playoffs as well. I do at the same time have concerns that that the Flames might not make it either. So I really thought Brad Treliving would do something a little bit more significant, because they were rumored to be in on a lot of the players that did end up getting moved as well. Maybe they just didn't like the prices. They didn't want to risk too much to the future. I don't know. But if we go another year without the Flames getting either into the playoffs or doing much of any damage in the playoffs, it's only a matter of time before part of their core, like Monahan, Gaudreau, or one of those top players ends up getting traded as well to shake things up, because clearly they're just not quite getting it done as is. So that is my winners and losers for NHL Trade Deadline 2020. I'd love to know what your thoughts are with all the moves. Which teams do you think did the best? Which teams would you lump in as the loser category? Either spent too much, didn't do enough, or didn't address their needs, or whatever you think. Let me know down in the comments, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And check out our channel membership options as well if you haven't already. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.